Some Democrats and members of the liberal media seem to be losing it completely. Their minds flown out the window over this. Congressman Dean Phillips' decision to primary President Biden. Listen to their take on Dean Phillips and his run.
First of all, talk about being an entitled white guy, right? He's a member of Congress. He's served, 2-3 terms. He's decided that he is going to run. The rest of the party has gotten behind Joe Biden. And this guy has almost no policy differences between him and Joe Biden.
This is 2023, and the last time I looked at the calendar, there are at least 6 states that you have to be on the ballot by the end of next month. So good luck, Mr. Phillips. Have fun out there.
Ooh, that was some shade. The congressman pressed on whether he's different from President Biden, said this.
Well, Kristen, I admire the president. I voted for those policies because they're good ones, and they will be making a difference over time. I'm not running against Joe Biden. I'm not running against President Biden. I'm running for the future.
Congressman, respectfully, you are literally running against President Biden.
I'm not running against President Biden. I'm running for the majority of Americans who want somebody different.
Politico puts it this way. Quote, the danger for Biden, then, isn't that Dean Phillips is a threat in the primary. It's that a Phillips candidacy could further expose a major Biden vulnerability at a time when the president is desperate to shore up his poll numbers in battleground states ahead of a likely general election rematch with former President Donald Trump. End of quote. Cassie Smedley, former RNC press secretary, vice president of COIN, and David Garlucci, former Democratic New York State Senator. David, to you first. Your take on Dean Phillips getting into the race and says his only difference really is that he's younger.
I can't hear.
All right. We'll go to Cassie first. Same question. Your take on, I'm going to run for president. And the only thing is that I'm like half your age.
Right, because I think his voting record with Joe Biden is like 100%. But so he may not be a real threat to Joe Biden's candidacy. The logistics just don't allow for that. But he is emblematic of the issue within the Democrat Party. We see Joe Biden's poll numbers in the basement, just like basement Joe Biden. And then we also see the sentiment of voters. They've been trying to tell their party leadership, we need something different. This isn't working. This leadership isn't working. Or Joe Biden simply is not fit for the job. And we don't like the alternative of Kamala Harris. So I think he represents that. And Democrats, instead of just excusing him away, should be paying attention to that and saying, is there something we should be doing differently? I think it's going to be a problem for them.
Cassie, it'll be you and me talking about this. We have lost the satellite connection with David Carlucci. Tech differences. It's live TV. It happens. Difficulties, rather. I do want to ask about this recent visit, though, of California Governor Gavin Newsom. He was a name that had come up so many times about, well, will he run? Will he not run? And now we know that the president and President Xi of China are going to get together after Newsom just recently visited, coincidentally. And Cassie, sit by, because apparently we have our Democrat guest back, and I definitely want to get his take on that. Did you hear my question, David?
I didn't hear it. Sorry.
All right. So Gavin Newsom, California, many have talked about him possibly running. He says he won't. I'm going to give you the shortened version now. Went to China. And now President Biden is going to meet with President Xi of China and come together on the issue of Iran benefiting us in this whole Middle Eastern conflict. Can Iran get, a peace deal done or ceasefire or whatever? What's your take? Is Dean Phillips going to be alone on the ballot, or will Gavin Newsom join him?
It looks like Dean Phillips is going to be alone, even if he makes some of these states. We see him only in New Hampshire. But the good news for Democrats is that Dean Phillips is not attacking Joe Biden, and Democrats are rock solid in support behind President Biden. So I think this is good for Democrats in the long run. And it's really just a media publicity stunt from Dean Phillips because, as we know, DNC has changed up the calendar, and New Hampshire will not have delegates at the convention. So this is really just a media stunt, just saying, hey, Joe Biden is old. We know that. But if that's the only challenge, I think the Democrats are going to have a problem, and Republicans in trying to beat Joe Biden.
It's interesting, Cassie, when you do look at some of the polling numbers, though, people do agree Joe Biden, at least in their opinion, is too old. None of this changes that. And he's still tied with Donald Trump in most pollings that you look at. And look at all that the former president's going through. He still can't beat him in those polls. Real quick.
Well, he's tied with Donald Trump, but he should be far out ahead if all of their policies are actually working. I think this is totally tone deaf when you say that the party is behind Joe Biden. Voters are different from party leadership in Washington. So I think it's going to be a real problem.
What's happening in Israel is a clear-cut case of good and evil. It doesn't get more clear than freedom-loving people defending themselves against barbaric terrorists.
We'll terminate the visas of all of Hamas sympathizers, and we'll get them off our college campuses, out of our cities, and get them the hell out of our country, if that's okay with you.
Former President Trump and fellow presidential candidate Nikki Haley showing their support for Israel and its war as the war there continues against Hamas. This comes after new polls out of Iowa shows Haley gaining ground on Trump a little bit, just a few months away from the state's critical caucuses. Let's bring in our political panel, former White House speechwriter and Fox News contributor Mark Thiessen, and Stagwell CEO and former Clinton pollster and advisor Mark Penn. I also noted this over the weekend. Well, first of all, let me bring this to you. The Axios behind the curtain, Biden's horror shows. Okay, this is the headline. And if you're the Biden team, you're looking at this, and then the Gallup poll showing that approval in October was 37%. That's down from just September. And then you have James Carville, the iconic Democratic leader in the Democratic Party, who told The Atlantic magazine that he said, nobody is saying, James, you're wrong. They're saying, James, you can't say that. And what that means is that they're saying you can't say that Biden's prospects for re-election have grown bleak. But Mark Penn, that's what the numbers show. What do you think is happening?
Well, I went back and looked at a number of the polls, and as these early October polls were done, and even mid-October, immigration actually had peaked up as an issue. Inflation continues to score. Israel actually is not one of the top issues with the public at that point. Look, he was 37% in April. He hit this again. The interesting thing is that in my poll, the Harris poll, he got a 58% approval for his Israel stance. It's the only thing that President Biden has had a majority approval in a very long time. So I think you'll see his ratings, if he continues to perform well in this conflict, actually go up and get rid of some of this, he's too old, he can't run, and all of that stuff that has really been plaguing him the last few months.
Mark Penn, though, what about James Carville saying that fellow Democrats are telling him, don't say the quiet part out loud. You're not allowed to say that Biden's candidacy might be in trouble.
I think that's probably accurate, but hey, look,
I'm sorry, I meant to get the other Mark in. I should have said Thiessen. Sorry, Thiessen, go ahead.
Oh, that's yeah. I mean, telling James Carville to shut up isn't going to change the reality that the majority of Democrats and the majority of Americans don't want Biden to run. It's like it's like saying if you don't call the fire department and your house won't burn down. The problem isn't that people are pointing out that your house is on fire. The problem is that your house is on fire. And James Carville is just pointing out the obvious. I would disagree a little bit with Mark in terms of the effect of Israel on this. I'm sure that the people who approve of him are not necessarily on Israel, not necessarily people who are going to vote for him. There's a Gallup poll that just came out that shows that since the war in Israel has started, Biden's support among Democrats has plummeted 11 points, down to 75%, which is really bad. And that tracks with the fact that support for Israel in the Democratic Party is at an all-time low. There was a Gallup poll earlier this year that shows 49% of Democrats support the Palestinians over Israel. And Mark's own poll that just came out recently shows that 46% of Democrats draw moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel. Not the Palestinians in Israel, Hamas, the terrorists, and Israel. So the Democratic Party has a big problem, which is that they've tolerated the rise of anti-Semitism in their ranks. And right now, Republicans don't think Biden's doing enough. A lot of Democrats think he's doing too much to support Israel, and that's going to hurt him, especially with Arab American voters.
Mark Penn, can you do a last word here about one of the squad members warned the Biden White House that if he continues to show such support for Israel, that Muslim Americans will turn away and not vote for him next fall?
Well, look, I think this thing's going to have to play out more. You can't really judge what's happening in a conflict in the middle or even the beginning of the conflict. I think Democratic voters at the end of the day are not going to vote for Donald Trump over Joe Biden. I think if he does well here, though, and he has been a strong supporter of Israel, he is going to pick up independent voters and have access to the real voters that, remember, right now in most of these horse races, Trump is beating him in my poll by 4 or 5 points.
Right.
He has to make up among independent voters and prove that he can be a wartime president. And he's doing a pretty good job so far.
Joe Biden's re-election campaign is in serious trouble. The president is struggling to deal with the outbreak of war in Israel and the problems piling up at home. Axios calls it, quote, Biden's 1979 moment. And now the White House is busting out the worst campaign surrogate to reassure voters.
Joe Biden is very much alive and running for re-election. Our democracy is on the line, Bill. And I frankly, in my head, do not have time for parlor games when we have a president who is running for re-election. That's it.
Why are you not 30 points ahead?
Well, I'm not a political pundit, so I'm not going to speak to that. Let me just tell you that. We're going to win. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but we will win.
You say that with such conviction.
I have no doubt.
All right, Dana.
Yes.
Joe Biden is very much alive. Should Karine Jean-Pierre worry about her job now?
No, well, I think that communications rule number one is you never repeat the question or you never repeat the negative. You don't need to say he's very much alive. I am curious about what happened to 60 Minutes has given Joe Biden 2 weeks ago a big spot and then Kamala Harris. The questions to me are pretty soft. Okay, like, why are you not winning? Why do not people? Well, okay, so one of the things happened is she talks about the poll numbers, and she about young people. Why is your approval so low with young people? And she says, well, we've given them everything they want on student loans and climate change. They just don't know it. But I think that's one of the things that shows there's this out of touch component where the young people can't afford the rent. The rent is too damn high, and they're screaming that from the rooftops. And the student loan thing is not going to actually fix the rent problem. And I think also they might just be disenchanted with the fact that they have all said he's just too old. That's not changing. I thought it was very interesting today. James Carville, he said that he has been told by other Democrats to basically shut up and stop saying that Joe Biden might have trouble in his reelection. So they don't want to actually say that the house is on fire. They want to pretend that it's not, but the house is actually on fire.
All right, Jesse, the problems are piling up domestically and internationally, but whether it's Afghanistan, Ukraine, or now what's going on in the Middle East, isn't Joe Biden, by funding Iran, continuing to create his own problems internationally?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. And he'll never admit that was his fault, because he said he was going to get us back to normal. And then we had 2 different strains of COVID for a year and a half, followed up by mandates. Everyone got fired. And then all of a sudden, you have hyperinflation and you have crime. You have a crazy border. And now you got wars popping up all over the place. And the American people did not vote for Joe Biden for this reason. We wanted normal, and this is a catastrophe. Now, imagine you're Joe Biden and you're sitting at the Delaware House and you're next to Hunter and you watch football. All of a sudden, 60 Minutes comes on. That's why everybody watches 60 Minutes on Sunday, because it's just after football. And it comes on and you see Kamala. And you're like, oh, what is she going to say? I'm alive? Thanks, Kamala. That's not really the best you can do. Because remember the last thing she said. They asked her about this a month ago, and she goes, I'm ready. I'm ready to take over. And everybody was like, you know what? You looked a little too ready, Kamala. So now she's like, he's alive. And that's like the way a mortician talks about people, dead or alive. And all Democrats see Joe Biden like this. There's no varying levels of performance. He's either breathing or he's not breathing. And that's because they have no bench. And that's because a lot of people in the White House, Judge, enjoy having a diminished president that they can manage behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah. Well, the foreign minister from Iran was given a visa and came to the UN and talked about, pretty much threatened us. And when he was asked on CNN about it, he wouldn't answer the question. Is it any wonder that they think we're weak if they can come here and threaten us?
Well, I should point out that the leader of Iran gets a visa under all administrations. So Republican presidents have let him come and Democratic presidents have let him come. And there have been various protests, but that's not some weakness on Joe Biden's front. I agree that this is definitely a crisis moment. I don't know if we're at 1979 levels, But it's incredibly disheartening and it's tough to handle for everybody. I think that the focus of this interview was really on her foreign policy work. And if you notice, I kept talking about she's been to 19 countries. She's met with over 100 leaders. I did think in terms of hard pushback, he went at her about the border. He said, you're supposed to be the border czar, and that's a complete disaster. Joe Biden is alive. Obviously, they need a smoother message about that. But it is interesting to watch Dean Phillips, who is the recently declared congressman. He's trying to make a Democratic primary out of this, and he doesn't have anything to run on. He's made that clear. I think Joe Biden did a great job, but I'm 54 years old and he's 80 years old. This is really just a generational issue, and I wonder if that is sparking more of this conversation amongst people. And I would obviously push back on Jesse about we have no bench. If it was an open primary, you would have Gavin Newsom in there, you would have Gretchen Whitmer in there, you would have Mitch Landrieu in there, a lot of people who are very, very qualified for that.
So if it isn't an open primary, I mean, why isn't it an open primary? Are they totalitarian in the Democrat Party?
I think they're planning on a big day where they all come out at once. That way they can all handle the pressure. That's my opinion, Jessica.
I don't think anyone who's been in politics has ever thought of that before.
I love Kamala declaring that Biden is alive. That's not a low bar. That's a no bar. It's the Brezhnev bar. I mean, I think that he should walk around with a little thing around his neck that holds a mirror to his mouth, just so we know he's alive. Bottom line, there is no there. Our country feels headless. We know that, but we're buried in our smartphones. It becomes less and less important to see the president because we're so inundated with all this stuff coming at us. But now we're in a time of wars. Not war, but wars. You got to pay attention now because things are going bad. Again, Trump's tweets might have injured your ego, but they didn't lead to wars and inflation, an open border, and crime. We need a realization that the president is your agent. He's your lawyer. He's not your pal. Imagine Joe representing you in court. He'd be more likely to share a dirty joke with the jury than actually defend you, right? Trump was the perfect agent or the perfect lawyer in that he aggressively makes the world's terms bow to your terms out of simply wearing you down and driving you crazy. Drove everybody crazy, but it worked, which is why I have to call out the selfishness, the incredible selfishness of so many of my peers, my respectful peers in media and the entertainment world, who put their temporary mental health above everything else, including world peace. They started in 2015 with Trump as a big, mean jerk. And then they built this big hysteria